Hello and welcome to the Nonprofit Podcast. Once again, I'm David Higgins. I am so glad that you're able to join us today for today's conversation. It is going to be amazing. I mean, have you ever thought our nonprofit needs to improve its communication? I know as a nonprofit leader, director, influencer, and all the years I was doing it, it's constantly going on my head. How can I talk to my community in a way that they can hear me? How can I communicate in a way that the real message gets across? And so that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Today's podcast is brought to us by the book, Demystifying Fundraising Funnels. And it is just being released wherever books are sold, on Amazon, Audible, as well as ebook is available. And I just got a note. Target is running with it, and they're like giving me a big props on the book, which was pretty exciting. But it's a digital marketing blueprint to fund your nonprofit. And one of the questions that was shot to me this last week in an email had to do directly with how do I discover the next generation of donors? And so in chapter 2, that's exactly what this book goes into, is how discovering the new within the new donor culture, the next generation. I don't know if you knew this, but did you know the millennials have taken over the entire conversation when it comes to who's donating the most? I mean, if there was a game and there was a winner, millennials will be winning right now. And everybody's saying, how? The X-Gen has more money. The baby boomers have more money. We're known for them to be big donors. But in mass, by population, the millennials are giving, and they're giving in a major way. They may not be able to give as much as the other generations, but because they don't have the same resources, but they're giving more by population. And it's pretty exciting, but they communicate online. So how do you connect to that next generation of donors? So this book dives in. I really hope you get a chance to read it. I know you'll enjoy the conversation within that. Of course, any questions, you can always email us and shoot them to us. We're more than happy to answer them for you. Well, back to the reason why we are here today. We get to talk to Marie Gettel-Gilmartin, and she is an amazing woman. She's a writer. She is a marketing communications coach and an expert, as well as a host of Finding Fertile Ground podcast. Our guest is a communications expert and the type of person you and I need to be hearing and listening to, because she's going to be a huge help. And I think some of the questions she's going to be answering today, which have come from you, by the way, are going to be great things for us to be able to remember and maybe even put to use right away. So,
Marie.
Edit that.
That's okay.
That's the big edit right there.
You've got
Boom.
3 podcasts today. 4 podcasts.
Marie, it is great to have you as a guest on the Nonprofit Podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, David, and congratulations on your book launch. That sounds amazing. I think I'm going to check it out, because even though I'm not running a nonprofit right now, I'm sure I can learn something.
That's exciting. I would love to get your input, because I have huge respect for what you're doing, for having you reading the book and giving me your thoughts on it. That'd be quite flattering. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I'm excited about this conversation we're going to have today. But I did notice in my research, because you've moved, you're in Portland and you're a Portlandian now. What's it like living there these days?
I actually grew up near Portland. I grew up in Beaverton. So I've lived, the other places I've lived have been Tacoma, Washington, where I went to college, and Japan. I lived in Japan for 3 years. But otherwise, I've been pretty much around Portland, and I love it here.
Wow. I guess it wouldn't really relate to Japan very well.
Actually, the weather's sort of similar.
Really?
And my husband is actually from the UK. The weather's pretty similar there too. So, you're from Yakima, right?
Well, I was born in New Zealand, and I immigrated to the United States when I was 8 years old. And my father came over here to help a nonprofit school be able to build the next generation of leaders that were going to go and launch a bunch of other nonprofits out there.
Wow.
And he was a prolific nonprofit founder. I mean, he founded the founders, and they went out and they started schools, orphanages, and a lot of other nonprofits around the world. And so he set the bar way too high for the rest of us. Like, when he passed away, there's over 750 independent nonprofits worldwide that he had either helped establish or had established himself. And the rest of us kids kind of looked at that going, okay, we're not going to compete.
But you're doing your own thing, which is perfect. It's
That's
a
great.
wonderful compliment to what he did.
I love just talking to people, hearing
Yeah,
their stories, encouraging people. So, absolutely. Thank you for saying
right.
that.
Yeah.
So, you have a reputation surrounding positivity and building up your listeners and readers. Why is it such a foundation setting for you? Why is it so fundamental?
Well, I've always been innately positive. I'm not sure exactly why, but I was born with birth defects. I was born with a cleft lip and a cleft palate and a club foot. So in addition to that, I've had a huge number of obstacles in my life. But my mom tells me that I was a happy child in spite of everything that came my way. I'm not sure why, but I've also been really inspired by people who survived difficult obstacles. And since I was a child, I have always constantly read, and I still constantly read. And my mission in life is to inspire and connect with people, similar to yours. You're a connector as well, I know. So I love to inspire people, and I like to get inspired by people. And as I get older, I realize this is the legacy that I want to leave behind. And I also believe in being kind whenever possible. So after George Floyd was murdered, I decided to use my platform to elevate resilient stories of historically excluded voices. And they have been an incredible inspiration to me.
Mm. I liked when I looked at your podcast, you list the diversity of the podcasts that you've had. That was a challenge for me. I actually went through and looked at everyone we've interviewed this season, everyone we're going to interview, and said, okay, let me see how we're doing as far as representing the world around us. And I found that I was a little unbalanced in some areas. And so I made a note. That is, we want a multitude of voices, and it's so important.
That's great. That makes me feel really good that I can inspire you to do that. That's wonderful.
It's amazing who taps you on the shoulder. One of them was a book I read back in 2019, and the author said it was actually really challenging. He said, you're either a producer of communication or you're a consumer of communication. And when it comes to communication, because of where I was in the stage of life, I was finding I was constantly just checking out all my social media feeds and what's going on in everybody else's life. And I was a consumer. And it's a different mentality to go from consumer to producer. And I had 30 years of experience, and I had written a lot in my 20s and 30s. I had done a lot of plays and music and produced a number of items that was in series when I was in San Diego for that time of life. But when I came up north here, I stopped producing, I started consuming. And that challenged me, and that actually led to me writing the book several months later. The notes and the ideas and the thoughts that I was putting out, instead of just spending hours a day consuming, started producing. Now, I said that to speak to you specifically. You know, you are a person that produces information. And for you, what was the thing that triggered that production of knowledge base that allows other people to rise up to it? Because you're constantly producing new information.
Yeah, it's funny because when you sent me that question, I really felt like I should be producing more. I'm always feeling like I should be producing more. So I love to write, so that helps me a lot. But I admire the fact that you've done a book, because I feel like I have at least one book in me that I have not written yet. So
But you got great
that's
blogs, by the way.
yeah. I'm a blogger, but I always want to blog more. I feel like I wish I had more time to do that. So right now I've been distracted a little bit. I'm learning Spanish on Duolingo. So so it's like calls to me like, oh, I should be on my Duolingo. So I'm lucky because writing comes easily to me. It does not come easily to a lot of people. So that is a huge benefit for me. And I actually love having my own business because I get to write about what I'm interested in. I've been blogging personally since probably like 2003 or 2004, but as a business, as part of my job, I can write about whatever I want to write about, and I don't have to worry about ticking people off or having somebody come to me and say this is not really our voice, or whatever. And I can also promote stories on my podcast that really fascinate me. So for my inspiration to keep the creativity flowing, I like to read stories about people who have defied the odds. So the two I'm right now, because so into books. Right now I'm reading 2 books. So one of them is by Fiona Hill, the career diplomat who testified at Trump's impeachment trial. So she was born very poor in a mining town in northern England. And she was the first person to graduate from college in her town. And she went on to get a PhD. And she's one of the world's experts on Russia and the Ukraine. So that's one book I'm reading about her story. And then I'm listening to a fascinating book by somebody named Nice Langete. She's a Kenyan human rights activist
I know her.
advocating. Oh, you
Yes.
know her? Really? Yeah.
Well, not personally. I know
yeah,
of
yeah,
her.
yeah. Yeah, she's advocating for alternative rite of passage for girls in Africa and campaigning to stop female genital mutilation. So reading those incredible stories and hearing stories from people I interview on my podcast, that helps me stay creative. And I also find music and other forms of creativity, like I do soul collage, which is a form of collage that is about expressing what's inside your soul. I like to make
Beautiful.
cards for people. I'm a musician. I like to sing and play the guitar, and so that helps me as well. And I like to just listen to music as well. All of those things kind of trigger my muse.
You talk about soul collage. My wife, Michelle, she's a painter. Her and her twin, she has an identical twin. They paint like on a Sunday morning. She'll be like, I'm heading over to my sister's. And I won't hear back from her for 7-8 hours.
Oh
when
my
she comes
gosh.
back, there's this beautiful painting. So all of our children have different paintings on their walls. Our living room's got paintings that she's done, a whole bunch of miniatures and that type of thing. And
that is incredible
for her as it is for you.
Oh my gosh, I love that. My sister lives in Puyallup in Washington, and I wish that she lived closer to me, and I would constantly want to do creative things with her too. So I love that story.
Yeah. In fact, when I was sitting at the table, my mother-in-law was a teacher her entire profession, and a great writer and reader. It's amazing how those two go together.
Yeah.
My sister-in-law, my wife's twin, she's a teacher and she's very articulate as well and writes all the time. My wife has always written materials and has a degree actually in being able to take language of a business and turn it into the right language within material being written. So she has basically a writing degree as well as one in finance because, well, she owns her own bookkeeping company and for nonprofits of all things.
Wow.
And I'm sitting at the table and I'm the goofball, right? I'm the people person. And the book had just been released and we're looking at the very first copy, which actually this is the very first copy. It's got a signature on the inside and everything is saying the very first copy ever ran of this book. And I'm like, how is it I'm sitting at this table with you guys and I'm the only published author?
Good
well,
question.
Things started getting thrown and I started running out of the room. Everybody was laughing and I had to go hide in my office.
Well, I think it takes more than creativity to write a book. It takes a lot of persistence and organization and resolve. So you obviously have that, which is great. You should be proud of yourself.
Absolutely a fact that you can learn it. I don't think I've always had it, but I've had to learn it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's a great lesson.
Well, you spent 28 years with a very highly rated civil engineering firm in the communications department. In fact, for almost a decade there, you oversaw the marketing communications of the entire organization. And that's a lot of responsibility. So it had multiple areas. And I was looking a little bit of your job description when you were there. And then you came out of that to run your own communications coaching brand, which I think is fantastic because what you did within the corporate realm, now you're sharing that information for all of us to be able to grab a hold and learn. You've always pulled into this communications field. Why communications?
Yeah, that's a good question. I've always been drawn to story, as I've talked about. Like I've always been a voracious reader. And I'm also, one of my signature strengths is input. So, when I was a little kid, I'd be sitting around the dining room table and there would be a cereal box on the table and I would be reading the back of the cereal box. I can't help but be drawn into words and, so that's one of my early memories. So, and the other thing is when I was a kid, I loved to write letters. Back in the old days, snail mail, I actually used to collect stationery when I was a child because I had so many pen pals and I would constantly be writing letters and I loved that kind of thing. The other thing is that I met my husband in Japan and I mentioned that he's from the UK and the first month we were living in two different cities and we were introduced by a mutual friend. And the first month after we met, we communicated by letters. And so letters and writing has always been really a great form of connection for me. So I majored in education in college until my junior year because I thought I wanted to be a teacher. But then I took advanced composition and I wrote about my personal sexual assault in an essay. And my professor asked me to read it out loud to the class, which was one of the most terrifying things I've ever done. But he also suggested that I think about majoring in English. So that's how I started, kind of thinking about it as a career. I never had thought about being a writer in any form. And then I went off to Japan to teach. And kind of a circuitous way that I ended up I started out in editing at C.H. Drumhill, the major environmental consulting firm. And I started out as a temporary receptionist, and then I found out they had an editing department. So that's how I started. It was kind of through the back door. So I've been really lucky in my career because I didn't set out with certain goals, like I'm going to run the Northwest Publications Group in so many years. It's like I just had a lot of really well-placed mentors who said, why don't you do this? And but back when I first started at CSM Hill, I wrote the company newsletter because I was the junior and nobody else wanted to do it. And so I ended up getting a lot of great feedback for that. And I won my first communications award from the International Association of Business Communicators for one-person projects. So throughout my time at CHM Hill, I had a wide variety of jobs, including the 13 years running the publications department. And it was kind of like having a small company. I managed all of the publication staff in Washington, Oregon, Alaska, Idaho, and Hawaii. And it was such a fun job. I loved that job. But what we produced was highly technical or sales, like sales proposals. And I really loved what I was doing. But my boss asked me during that time, what would you do if you did something different? And I said, I think I would like to do communications. And I just planted the seed. And several years later, I reinvented myself into a communicator. And then I went on to win 9 more communications awards during my time at CSM Hill. So towards the end of my time at CSM Hill, which was acquired by a much larger engineering firm, and my job was eventually got eliminated, but I had a blast because I got to manage communications for our sustainability and corporate citizenship, our foundation. And we got to give away $1 million a year to nonprofits that focused on STEM education and sustainable communities. So that was a blast. I did the blog, I did all of our internal communications, all of our external communications. It was so much fun. And I loved the executive director of the foundation. She was awesome. So and then when I started my own firm, as you said at the beginning, I realized that everything I did in the corporate world led me to prepare me to run my own company. So here we are.
Fantastic. Oh, that's a fun story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes.
Next week, I have the privilege to interview the executive director of the sexual assault nonprofit in Seattle area.
Oh.
And they have made such great headroads into the way they run their nonprofit, is making ripple effects nationally.
Wow.
And I can't wait to have that conversation with her. But one of the things we're going to talk about is this next question that I want to ask you. And we're in a world that emphasizes the negative. It's because we're becoming more and more inundated with the news. The news knows that the negative is going to create a more of a watchability. It's going to grab your attention. It's going to hook you faster. It's much easier to hook somebody on a negative than a positive. And it's sad, but it's just the culture that we've allowed to rise up around us. And I know this is anti the way you produce everything that you do. How do I know that? Because I actually spent some time listening to your podcast, and I grabbed something that this question is actually built out of, and that is, how do we as nonprofits maintain a positive voice?
That's such a good question. I totally get this because just last night before I went to bed, I said to my husband how discouraged I'm feeling about climate change. So I can totally relate. And especially because I have 3 children. My youngest is 15. He's really a thinker, a very sensitive child. And the other day we were listening to he loves Marvin Gaye. He loves soul and R&B. So we were listening to the Marvin Gaye song "Mercy, Mercy Me," which is all about environmental degradation, right? And he was like, this was 51 years ago that Marvin Gaye recorded that song. He said, Mom, everything that Marvin Gaye talks about on What's Going On in the album is so relevant right now. It's like, oh my God. So it's easy for me as a mom to get discouraged about what we're leaving behind as our children. And so the problem with this, though, is that as communicators, if we focus on the negative, most people will shut us out. Not everybody, but a lot of people will shut us out. And I read a book many years ago called Believing Cassandra, and it's by Alan Atkinson, and it's about being an optimist in a pessimist world. It's specifically about sustainability, but I think it can apply to a lot of things. So Cassandra, as you probably know, is a Trojan priestess of Apollo in Greek mythology, and she was cursed to utter true prophecies, but never to be believed. So Atkinson encourages readers to take strategic action to prove Cassandra's warnings wrong. And he's basically says, like, people didn't listen to Cassandra because she was all doom and gloom. So we have to find a way to communicate that's not doom and gloom. So that's why it's better to focus on the positive so people will feel called to act. So one example is, in the year 2000, I co-founded a nonprofit to support families with medically fragile babies. It was called Precious Beginnings. And the story behind that is my first son was born at 24 weeks gestation and weighed 1 pound, 6 ounces. So my husband and I, along with a number of other families, served on the hospital's family advisory board. And then the nonprofit grew out of that. So as a communicator for this nonprofit, I focused on celebrating milestones and stories of hope. We had a lot of families who lost their babies. So of course we communicated about that as well. But the thread of communication was about the hope. And because it's so important for these families who have babies in the NICU to have hope that they can hold on to. So it's hard. It can be really hard, though, especially when you're dealing with difficult subjects. I think that as far as sexual assault, the organization you're interviewing next week, as a survivor, I think for me, it's really helpful to also have stories of people who have emerged on the other side and are using that experience to help others. I've interviewed a lot of people on my podcast that are sexual assault survivors. And for some, it's really been incredibly traumatic, and it's really posed a lot of obstacles in their lives. But they have all found a way to get past that and tell a different, not have it represent their whole life.
There's a lot of power in hope,
Yes.
being able to build the hope. I had somebody I spoke to almost 2 months ago. They said it's better to have even false hope that you stoke than no hope at all. Because I love the truth. I want my hope to be well-founded and well-rooted, and I can, and that's always been an important part of me. And I said, but there have been times I've hoped in things that have just faded away, that have and at the time I really felt they were real, but then after a while, it was a false hope. And he turned and he said, David, it's more important that you have any hope, even false hope, than no hope. And even if you have false hope, don't ever begrudge that you fed it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to take that. That was the drop mic moment for me.
Yeah, I love that, because even if you're let's take COVID, for example, that I am in a book group, and I have this book group text chain, and one of my friends just said, yes, call me wildly optimistic. We're constantly analyzing what's going to happen with COVID. Is it going to ever be over? Right. And I go up and down on that. Even though I'm this avid optimist, sometimes I get really, as all of us, we get really discouraged and feel like it's never going to go away, right? But it doesn't do any harm to be hopeful, I think.
I wrote down the name of the book, Believing Cassandra. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Believe Cassandra.
Believing. Yeah,
Believing Cassandra.
Cassandra. Yeah.
We'll go ahead and find that on Amazon and put the link to that book at the bottom of the notes on this podcast. So if somebody here is saying, I need a book like that, you can just go in there, click on that link, and order that book from
It's
Amazon.
Pretty outdated by now, but I think the author has other books out as well.
All right. Well, we'll do our research. Yeah. That's what Elizabeth's for.
Okay.
She always makes you look great, and all the props go to her. So
awesome.
We'll get that figured out. Okay. But one of the things that, especially with nonprofits, which I spent plenty of time in smaller nonprofits. With small nonprofits, our message and our communication, our message that we're talking about, it's kind of like chasing cats, because we're constantly running after so many things, especially those few people that are on staff. There's a article that was written called "Tyranny of the Urgent," and that is so much the life of a nonprofit leader, or within especially small nonprofits. There's not too many people you can delegate to. You got to have great volunteers, but there's so many of the more important things you just have to find a way to do and still do your mission. So here's my question for you. What are the disciplines I need to maintain consistency with my message if I'm in that position?
Well, I think the first thing is to have a leader and a board that are committed to communications. that is like one of the most important things, really, to have somebody who will lead the effort and also have people's backs as well and guide them. The second thing is prioritize communications in what you do. Make a communications calendar and regularly check it. Invest in a great website. Create a mailing list if you don't already have one, and schedule and send regular newsletters. Post daily on Facebook and LinkedIn, which are the two places that you're most likely to find funders. LinkedIn in particular is often ignored, but that's where people are that's where the business people are. So LinkedIn's important. And then review communications priorities each month and year. That's my list.
That's 6. I love 6-point lists. Oh my goodness. I would have fun with that in editing. Yes. Excellent. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's awesome. Now, can you build for me a nonprofit communication engagement strategy? If I'm hurried, busy, and I get a chance to listen to this podcast, I'm like, okay, give me a strategy in 5 minutes that I can just take and I can start thinking and researching but where would I start? How do I start from zero to building something that has the potential of working for my nonprofit?
So I'm going to give you another list.
Oh,
I love lists. I love lists too. So the first thing I would suggest is to hire or contract with someone who specializes in communications and community engagement. Don't try to do it on your own. That's really, unless you have that kind of background yourself, I really believe in hiring professionals. I just finally hired my my first business coach last October. It's like, she is worth her weight in gold, right? So I hired somebody to do my taxes, because my life has gotten more complicated with the business, and I really believe in paying experts. So I would suggest that. Listen to your stakeholders. What would they like to see in your communications and your community engagement? Bring the board and leaders together to strategize your communications priorities and dreams and discuss your audience. I think the more people you involve in this, the better. If it's just like the CEO or the founder, then you're not going to have as many good ideas. So bring people together to discuss it. Focus your communications on giving back to the community rather than fundraising. So, often we, in nonprofits, it's all about raising funds, because you have to have the funds to do the business or to do the nonprofit, to do your good work. But if nonprofits focus on how they're benefiting the community, I think that's going to pay off without only focusing on the fundraising. So what kind of services are you giving to people? And that's what your communication should be about primarily. Of course, you're going to still do the fundraising, the fundraising communications as well, but the focus, the majority of your communications should be about helping community, I think. Define your message in a soundbite clearly, and make sure that everyone on your organization can recite it. What can motivate people to take action? Make it simple. So it can be, memorized. It can be spout off by anybody who runs into somebody as part of your organization. Decide which communications channels you want to use and where your audiences are. I mentioned LinkedIn. LinkedIn is, a really great resource that I don't know how many nonprofits take advantage of that. I know some do, but I would use it more than they are now, probably. And then after all this, I would create a communications plan as the result of the strategy meeting and include audience analysis and goals for communications engagement, key messages, and then a table of actions. Under each key message that you want to send, I would have actions under each message of how you're going to actually implement those messages. And then create an annual communications calendar and make sure to include all the media that your stakeholders use. So you have like a website, you have a newsletter, you have social media. Don't forget podcasts, because podcasts are a great resource right now, especially. So make sure that everyone can get your information in a different way, because not everybody, I find, like for my husband, for example, he tends not to read newsletters, unless I tell him, like, you're my proofreader, you have to read this. But he's maybe more likely to read something on social media than on a newsletter. So make sure you're paying attention to different types of your audience. And then also tailor your messages for different audience segments and news channels. So, like, for example, using the sexual assault resource nonprofit. I don't want to call them a sexual assault nonprofit, because it's like, I don't know what their title would be. Sexual assault survivors support, perhaps. So you're going to have your survivors are going to be one audience, but also you're also going to have your funders, and they're another audience. And then there's the general public that you want to draw in more of. So make sure that you tailor your information for your different audiences and your different channels. And then the final thing is build partnerships with companies and other nonprofits to amplify your messages and extend your reach. There's my bite-size communication strategy.
Wow.
That's a lot, I know.
That was good, though. That was super good. I don't think anybody here can write that fast, so I'm going to type it out and I'm going to put it where everybody can just download it.
You know what? I'll send you my thoughts.
Would you?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! If I attach a PDF link to this podcast, that would be a huge resource for everybody. Thank you.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
Then you wouldn't have to type it up.
Well, then I'm going to ask you to pull one from the hip here, because if you're going with lists and notes, you came in well prepared. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to ask you to give us a mic drop. Give us a thought that we can run with as we go through the rest of this week and into the weeks ahead.
So for me, it's all back to my life's mission, which is inspire and connect. So I think those should be the key priorities for any nonprofit. So first of all, inspire. So how do you tell your story to motivate people to join you in your cause? So can you interview one of the people that you've helped and share their story on YouTube and your website? Blast that all over social media. And I think that the best nonprofits have a whole stack of stories of people that they have helped and their lives have been enriched by their interaction. So the story has to be clear, concise, and moving. And photos and videos really help move that forward. So I think that anytime that nonprofits communicate with their members or potential donors, stories should be the first priority. And the reason I believe that is that when you have facts and figures, I love facts and figures. I love data. But I'm not a numbers. I mean, I was an English major. I wasn't a math major. So I don't remember numbers. I remember stories. So you have to make sure that you have those figures as well as the story. And the other thing is the story can reinforce the data. So one example is I can tell you that Black Americans are exposed to 38% more polluted air than white people in America. And they're 75% more likely to live in communities that border a plant or a factory. So that obviously leads to higher levels of health problems like asthma, diabetes, hypertension, and for both minorities and low-income populations. And that is partly why they are 3 times more likely to be hospitalized from COVID. Mm-hmm. And Black people are also nearly 4 times as likely to die from exposure to pollution than white people. But so there's that really powerful data, compelling data for environmental justice, right? But you're more likely to remember those statistics if I also tell you about a young Black mother of two named Dolly Burwell. She was one of the first people to organize for environmental justice. So she assembled a small group of Black women to fight against a dump in their neighborhood. And this was back in, the early 80s. And so over the 6-week protest, women lay in the path of the dump trucks beside the men. And children often protested with their parents. More than 500 people were arrested, and including Burwell, and she was hauled away 5 times. Unfortunately, they lost the fight to stop the dump, but she inspired a movement and awareness of the need for environmental justice, which still lingers today. So that's a much more compelling, you're going to remember that, right? More than the data, perhaps. So the second piece is connection. And I feel like we can always accomplish more if we expand beyond our little community and our little reach. So this is really true for nonprofits, and it's true about business. And I choose to view other companies as collaborators rather than competitors. And I think that everybody can view life that way, instead of being competitive, like how can I work with this other business or this other nonprofit? So one of my clients is called the Cultural Advocacy Coalition of Oregon. And it's a group of arts, culture, and humanities nonprofits like theaters and art museums and historical societies. And they are working together to advocate for funding and policies that will create a thriving environment for those arts, culture, et cetera, across Oregon. And so as working together as an advocacy organization, they can accomplish so much more than they would if they were just working alone. So I recommend that nonprofits reach out to like-minded or overlapping nonprofits to pool your resources, and equally important, partner with businesses. So back when I was on the board of Precious Beginnings, the nonprofit that helped the NICU families, we were able to partner with 2 restaurants, Pizza Schwitza and Baja Fresh, and they provided free food for parents in the NICU on Monday nights. It was amazing. All we had to do was show up and ask, right? So businesses are looking for a way to give back to their communities. And I really believe that nonprofits would benefit from reaching out and building those relationships more frequently. Obviously we've got like United Way, and that's what they're all about. But small businesses, you don't have to be part of United Way to do that. Small businesses are really have just as much opportunity to do that. And I'd recommend that nonprofits seek out businesses that have corporate social responsibility statements, or they've clearly stated an interest in being involved with their communities. And also businesses often look for ways for their employees to volunteer. So one example is on my second podcast that I started in April 2021. It's called Companies That Care, and it's about businesses that are trying to make the world a better place for all. Some of the companies actually have nonprofits as part of their business, and others are working directly with nonprofits. I interviewed a couple of foundation executive directors, really, really cool content about nonprofits on that podcast. So one example is I interviewed the founder of a language interpretation company called Linguava, and they provide language interpretation for medical services. And they, like, once or twice a year, they volunteer at a fair that helps new immigrants get set up for success in Oregon. So really, really cool ways to give back. So the other thing is, at Seastrom Hill, we had strategic giving pillars and partnerships with strategic nonprofits. And in our case, they focused on STEM education and sustainable communities. So I recommend that companies prioritize where they're donating, and so they can get more bang for their buck. But nonprofits can also do the research to find out what companies are focusing on their particular area of expertise and approach them that way. You can target your connections. So one example that we did at Seastrom Hill is we partnered with Dow Chemical, which was a client of ours, and we sent science teachers to the Smithsonian for a course in the summer to get training. And we paid for, with Dow, we paid for them to go to the Smithsonian and get the science training. Or we sent volunteers to build bridges in Rwanda and South America with a nonprofit called Bridges to Prosperity. And we raised over $1 million each year for a nonprofit called Water for People. So those are just a few examples. So, and another piece of connection, because I'm all about connection, is creating a community in your nonprofit for people to support each other. So do you have an active online group of support? Do you provide opportunities for people to engage with each other and volunteer in person? Do you have like a volunteer or a donor thank you event, or auctions that focus not just on fundraising, but also on fun? So I really believe that people stay with nonprofits. They stay committed to nonprofits that have community and that inspire them. It's all about inspire and connect for me.
Wow. That was an awful lot to make me think. My brain had to turn on like all the lights, because you gave me a to-do list and a life mission at the same time. That was pretty great.
Well, another one of my strengths is ideation. So I have a ton of ideas. So yeah, you just ask me a question and I'll be like a spout that's overflowing.
My wife, when she first married me, I'd come home from work every day with a new idea. Like, we could do this. After about 6 months, we don't married 6 months. I come through the door and she meets me and she hands up. She always got home just before when she goes, "You cannot give me an idea that's going to change our life again." Right now, I'm tracking it, and we're at over 90 ideas that are all life changing.
She was writing them. So, have you ever taken the Enneagram?
Yes.
What are you on the Enneagram?
Enneagram, I'm a number 7.
That does not surprise me. See, I'm a number 7 as well.
No way.
Yes,
7
yes.
unite.
I was thinking when you said that, it's like, oh, that sounds like a 7.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And whenever I go, like, I like to plan vacations. So if I go on VRBO or whatever, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna look for places for us to stay, and I send my husband an email, and it has like 15 ideas, and he is like, I cannot take this. You have to send me like 2 or 3. But when my middle son is in college in Connecticut, and he just started his first year, and when I was planning our trip to take him back there, and I found a couple of places for us to stay in Boston. We were going to have 5 days in Boston, so I sent him my list. He loved it. He was like, "No, I don't want to stay here. I want my own room. I want to stay in this part of Boston." And he loved it because he's another 7. So,
I have to ask you, what number did you marry?
2. And I thought I was a 2 at first. The first test I took, because I have some 2 tendencies. But yeah, I took an online test and I was convinced I was a 2. And then I went to a one-day Enneagram course, and the guy gave us paragraphs that describe each type. And I looked at it, it's like, oh my God, I'm so much a 7. And then the other thing that helped me understand that is that my husband shared an anecdote that if you're driving along, somebody lets you in behind them, right? He's like, I hate it when I let somebody in and they don't like wave back at me. And I was like, I don't always wave back. I don't always wave back at people. Now I do. But before he said that, it's like, oh my God, it never occurred to me. So it's his 2, because he wants to be thanked. If he does something, he wants to be thanked for it. And I like to be thanked, but it's not what drives me.
I married a 4.
Oh, interesting.
My mother's a 1. My oldest child's a 1.
Wow.
You tell me I'm not allowed to make mistakes. I'll tell you that's the reason
yes.
why. And then my 2 boys are a 6 and a 9. So
wow, interesting. I love the Enneagram. It's fascinating. Well, It's nice to meet another 7. I know a few others.
There's not a lot as much as there are others, but
there are not a lot. Have you heard of the there's a podcast that I was listening to for a while. It was like Enneagram Styles or something.
I haven't heard that.
It focuses on different parts of the Enneagram and interviews people. You might be interested in that.
Oh, that sounds good. Well, my wife would be. I get educated by all the different charts. Like, we owned chickens for a while. We had 7 chickens when we lived in Vancouver. And for those 2 years, I tell you what, we had those chickens 4 months. She had their personality types, their emotional disposition, their love language, and the Enneagram number for every
Oh, I
one of the
love
chickens.
it. I
But
love
you
it.
turn around and
Oh my
I've not been
God.
able to eat a chicken the same way ever since. I look at this, I poke it, I'm having chicken and salad for dinner, having very healthy, and I'm like, okay, what personality type am I eating right now?
Oh, that's so funny.
So no,
Oh,
we weren't able to eat any of our chickens. They ended up being given away when we moved here to
that
Yakima, where
sounds
we
like
live
a
now.
4, doesn't it? Sound like a
Yeah,
4? Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah,
Artistic. Yeah. Mhm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, you know, it has been an incredible conversation. I cannot tell you how much I've appreciated your company today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it too.
If a listener wants to connect with you, should I say when a listener wants to connect with you, what is the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, my website is www.fertilegroundcommunications.com. My email is marie@fertilegroundcommunications.com. I'm also all over social media and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Communications can be full of pitfalls and very difficult for people, and I strive to make communications painless.
Absolutely. I encourage everybody to check out that website, listen to the podcasts. I think you'll really enjoy them. And, you know, sometimes you listen to podcasts and you feel driven or you feel tired at the end. It's not the way here. That you feel encouraged and built up and feel like you can take your world on. And that's the kind of podcast we try to be here as well. So I sure hope that you get a chance to check that out. You know, we end every conversation by giving a shout out to a nonprofit.
I love that.
And so we want to just brag on the people that are doing such a great job out there. So I'm going to go first. Is that all right?
Yes.
And then I'm going to toss it at you. Is that good?
Yes.
So when I first heard about this nonprofit I'm talking about today, it really touched my heart. And I ended up going online and researching who they are. And I started looking at what they're doing. And I have not been able to walk into their offices yet. But one day I'm going to, because sometimes an organization, though we all strive to be really meaningful in what we do, some of them are just beautiful in their heart and their intention. And that's what this nonprofit is. Adelante Mujeres is working to build not just a society, but one that's empowering Latinas to lead. For Latina women and their families, generations of poverty, racism, sexism, isolation has limited opportunities for empowerment. But Adelante Mujeres, their mission is to change that. They're rated as one of the best nonprofits in the state of Oregon to work for. So not only are they taking care of people on the outside, they're taking care of people within their organization. In fact, if you go and look for the 10 best nonprofits in Oregon, they're there. If you go look at the 10 best nonprofits to work for in Oregon, they're number 6 on the list. And everyone above them are educational nonprofits and health organizations that really have the ability to make a great benefit work package. But this is the reason why they're rated there. It's because the people just love working for them. They really do. They take care of the people that are around them. So go look at who they are and look at their social media. Let them know you see them, because they are really helping an invisible people group, one that society and culture for many, many years has made invisible, and they are really having to raise up leadership. So go check out adelantemujeres.org and let me know what you think of them. I look forward to hearing back from you on that. And now it's your turn, Marie. Talk to me.
Well, first of all, I just wanted to say how much I love the fact that you chose Adelante Mujeres, because they were actually one of my clients last year.
No way.
Yes. Yes.
That was totally
I know. Isn't
unexpected.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it's serendipity. I actually worked with them on their Empresas manual. They have an Empresas program where they help Latinas with their businesses. And I think that the Empresas program also allows men. I can't remember now. I should remember this, but I helped them write and edit and format their manual for this program. So it was a really wonderful opportunity to work with them. I loved it. I love what they do.
Wow.
So yeah, and so my nonprofit is a little bit of an overlap to yours. It's called The Immigrant Story. And I've been involved with them for the last couple of years. And their mission is to document, narrate, and curate stories about immigrants to promote empathy and advance an inclusive community. So the founder is my friend, Sankar Raman, and I interviewed him on my podcast. If you're interested, go check it out. He's got a great story about how he founded the nonprofit. He founded it after Trump was elected, and he comes from India, and he talked about an experience that he had when he was in grad school in Indiana, and really he's just a wonderful man. So as of last October, the Immigrant Story has shared the stories of 200 immigrants from 72 countries. So they have Sankar is this incredible photographer. So if you go to their website, theimmigrantstory.org, you'll find this beautiful photography and really beautifully curated written stories about all of these immigrants that they've interviewed. They also have a live event, and that's where I've gotten involved as like an assistant producer of these live events, where they have some of the immigrants get up and tell their stories, like a moth style storytelling. So fascinating organization. They're getting a lot of really great kudos in Oregon and beyond, and I just am really excited about that organization. So yeah.
They are an amazing organization.
They are. I've also interviewed. My very first podcast interview that I ever did was with Olive, who I don't know if you got to listen to that one. She is an immigrant from Burundi. She was raised in a refugee camp in Tanzania. So I knew I knew that I wanted her to be my very first interview because she's so resilient, and so I love working with these immigrants.
Last year, Michelle introduced me to the Immigrant Story. She found them in a blog, in an article.
Wow, so cool.
And she said, David, we just sat down one night. We sat down to watch some TV, a TV show we want to watch, and it never got turned on. We just sat there and got lost on their webpage.
Well, they have a podcast now too.
I did not know that. Yes. I could only imagine of all the people that need one, they would.
It's a really good podcast too. Yeah, they're just, I started getting involved with them. So I think it was 2019 that I actually organized an event for my church. It was all about inviting women immigrants to come in and tell their stories. It was called Voices from the Margins. And my connection, somehow I got connected to Sankar. Sankar helped us come up with some of these immigrant women. He showed up at the event. And then they had their first live event later that month as part of Beaverton's Welcoming Week. So I went to their event, and then he contacted me. He basically was doing what I'm talking about, the connection. He contacted me and said, "Can you help us? Can you help us? I think instead of like you doing your own event, like will you be on our team?" I think that's what he was getting at. But so we worked with our second live event was stories from dreamers or other Latinos, and the last event was about genocide, escaping genocide, and that was Olive, my friend who I interviewed on the podcast. She was one of the storytellers, and they're just now releasing some of those stories on YouTube. So if you want to go check them out, I would go on YouTube, immigrantstory.org too.
Wow. That's fantastic. Well, we ran out of time. I wish we hadn't, but we have ran out of time.
I know, I've talked a lot. I'm so sorry.
No, you're a great storyteller. In fact, I love telling stories. We should start another podcast called Marie and David Tell Stories.
We should. That would be fun.
We just go back and forth and try to do one story better than the other. It would be quite entertaining, I think.
Yeah. Oh, no, I know. I think we should call it Sevens Unleashed.
Oh, that's scary. That'd be more like a horror podcast.
I know. We'll have to find another way to collaborate in the future, David.
Sounds good. Well, I want to thank you for being our guest today.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And to everyone that's been listening, thank you for being part of this wonderful conversation, funny conversation, enjoyable. I really hope you were challenged. You have some really good thoughts that's going to allow you to feel like there's things you can run with as you move forward into your week and your month ahead. And until we talk here in a few days, thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. We really appreciate you. You're important, and we need people like you in our lives. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.
Much I want it, see how bad I need it. You gotta look into my eyes. That's how much I want it, that's how bad I need it. You gotta look into my eyes.